Okay, so good evening, morning, afternoon / time zone, depending on where you are. I'm Zoe. I'm a PhD candidate in film at the University of Kent, and my area of interest is the intersection between fantastic beasts and animals and the real counterparts, and how the mythical aspects of animals come to have broader significance than the original species. So my talk today will be split into 4 parts with a break in the middle. I'll start first by just recounting the story from historical accounts and how it lighted the spark of imagination and got the interest of a lot of people worldwide. Then I will go through 3 case studies, I would say from the most fantastical to the most historically accurate. So the first one would be Teen Wolf, the American drama. The second one is Le Pacte des Loups, which is a French feature film. And the third one is a video from the series Puppet History, which is like edutainment on YouTube. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat and we will address them. So after the Teen Wolf section and after the end. So yeah, let's start. So this is the illustration that was used for my banner and also the title card for Even Bright, and it's one of the most famous illustrations of the beasts. So you see it's kind of like a wolf, but not really clear. It has a very stark lipstick and eyeshadow there. So what was going on at that time? So it is the 1760s. France just lost the 7-year war against Great Britain and their allies. So this was considered the first major world war. So I think that's Churchill that was quoted saying that. It impacted most of Europe. So France was allied to Austria and Great Britain was allied to Prussia. And also, more crucially, all of the respective colonies of the big European powers. So the war also traveled to the Americas and to Africa and the Indias. France lost and was very bitter about it, signed a peace treaty, which was the Treaty of Paris, but had no intent that this could be a lasting peace. In particular, the treaty was very costly for France. We lost a lot of our colonies, which we shouldn't have had in the first place, and kept only the ones that produced sugar, like Martinique and Guadeloupe, and lost most of our colonies in what is now the United States and Canada, including New France, which will become relevant a bit later. This also led to military reforms, especially the Navy and the artillery, and a lot of money and effort was put into upgrading all of the military equipment and techniques from the French army. And paradoxically, all of these technological improvements were also used by the revolutionaries during the French Revolution just a few years later. France was left with many debts to various parties and struggled to pay during the 18th century, which means that rural France was particularly forgotten and impoverished. In terms of politics, more generally, it was the monarchy of Louis XV, who was a lot less charismatic and popular than his great-grandfather Louis XIV, who was the Roi Soleil. So Louis XV became king at age 5, but the country was under the regency of his uncle, the Duke of Orleans, until the king turned 13. So during this regency period, the Duke was mostly concerned with getting the most of the situation for himself and having parties and such, not really concerned with, leading the country. And the king, when he came of age, was also more concerned with the court itself and hunting, of which he was a big fan. So he delegated a lot of the power to the local nobility and the church. It's also a context of tension, religious tension between the Catholics and Protestants in France, with the oppression of the Protestants mostly and the Reformed Church, especially after the Edit de Nantes, which was very controversial at the time. So where exactly are we talking about? So this is just a general map of France, and you can see in blue where the Gévaudan is. So just a note, Gévaudan is the name of a comté, so a county, and is not the name of the beast itself. So there's a bit of a, Frankenstein versus Frankenstein's monster thing happening, in which a lot of people use Gévaudan as a metonymy for the beast, but it is not. The comté itself does not currently exist anymore as an administrative entity, but is part of Auvergne, Haute-Loire, and Lozère. Still to this day, it is one of the most, one of the least densely populated areas of France. Most of it is quite high, windy plateaus that are very bad for agriculture, not very fertile land. I would also add that at that time, there was still a stark contrast between the north and southern parts of France, with the north part mostly speaking Languedoc, which led to modern French, and then the south speaking Languedoc, which is also what gave the name to the region Languedoc, which is closer to Spanish and Catalan than to Germanic or Anglo-Saxon languages from the north. So that made it even harder for the Paris institutions, including the king, to control and rule over the south of France. So most of the names and words that I'm going to use today that are in French are in modern French, which takes from the Languedoc, but I'll go through a tiny bit of language for the Languedoc as well, because this is relevant. So just to give you a visual idea of what the area looks like, this is one of the, the kind of environment and landscape that you can find. So you have very sparse vegetation, quite rocky terrain with a lot of, a lot of crags and such, a lot of granite, including granite caverns that are, dotted here and there, but very, very poor land to grow any crop there. So that means that a lot of the people there were also mostly shepherds who, survived by having flocks of cattle. The attacks themselves, the first attack attributed to the beast was in the summer of 1764, but that one, the lady survived. The first victim was Jeanne Boulet, who was 14, and in her death certificate, so first she was buried without religious rites because she hadn't gone to confession before being killed. So just a friendly reminder to always go to confession regularly so that you can have religious rites if you want to. But in the death certificate, they also said that she was killed by la Bête, which means that the beast was already known before. So this is the first recorded death from it. That year, attacks multiply, mostly lone children tending sheep in the fields and young women, a lot of them that were particularly vulnerable. The attacks focused on the neck and head region. Several victims had their throats completely cut out, and one of them was decapitated, and they didn't find the head until later on. Most reports cite or quote like a wolf, but not a wolf. And that's quite relevant because wolf attacks were quite common at that point. A lot of people, especially shepherds, were familiar with wolves, including adult wolves and cubs. So they would know what a wolf looked like. So saying that it looks like a wolf, but it's not a wolf is quite relevant, which led to the name La Bête, the beast, Bestia, La Bestia in Languedoc. And then you also have the regional dialects of Bestiau, Bestieux, and Bestiaux, which are all variations on the same name. So this is a map of the attacks that I took from the website bêtedugevaudan.fr, which is one of the most, I would say, most popular fan websites or amateur website. And I will come back to that topic later because that website has a very clear opinion of what was really going on with the beast. But as you can see, all of the attacks seem to be concentrated around quite a small area, even if there are a few outliers. So it's not exactly clear how many of these attacks can be attributed to the same animal, or if there was no single, attacking animal at all. So of course, when people started dying quite drastically towards the end, about 100 people were attacked, 100 deaths recorded, more than 120 people were injured. Numbers, of course, are very hard to verify, but several measures were taken. The first one was to call Capitaine Duhamel, who was the local captain stationed at Clermont-Ferrand, which is a bigger town about 100 kilometers, 50 to 100 kilometers away from the area. So he came in with his dragoons and had a very military approach to the situation. So they just took their horses, got into the woods, tried to find any wolves that they could. It did not quite work, of course, they did not get the beast. The second type of response was from the Bishop of Mantes, the Évêque of Mantes, which was a religious approach. So he said that the beast was sent by God to punish men for their sins. He cites Saint Augustine, who talks about the justice of God and the Bible itself, especially the threats proffered against Moses, saying, I will stand against them beasts with sharp teeth. And in order to help the situation, he said that 40-hour prayers had to be recited for 3 consecutive Sundays. So depending on how you feel about religion, you might feel that this is a bit useless, but anyway, it did not work. The next people that were called were the Denevals, was a father and son duo. They are famous wolf hunters from Brittany, so that's the northwest of the country. So they came in and had a slightly different approach. They tried to lay traps and poison bait, so mostly sheep and dog carcasses that they poisoned and left out for the beast. And of course, they clashed with the military approach in that they blamed the soldiers for just making too much noise and scaring the beast away, so that it couldn't come and take the baits. That did not work either. So the king got this got the attention of the king, and he sent his own weapon master, so porte-arquebusier in French, called François Antoine, and his own son. So they both came down and tried to hunt and kill the beast. I will come back to that topic in a bit. Another relevant figure is the Marquis of Apcher, Marquis d'Apcher, who is a local nobleman who lent his own resources to the hunting efforts of the various parties. The victims of the wolves themselves also started to become, presented as heroic. So on the left, you have an engraving representing Jacques Portefeuille and his friend. So he's a young teenage boy who was out in the fields with his friends, and one of the friends was attacked by the beast, who tried to carry him away. The children started to run, but Jacques Portefeuille rallied them, and they attacked the beast and tried to save his friend. They managed to, scare the beast away, but the friend later died of his injuries. As a result, this also got the attention of the king, who decided to pay for Jacques' education and sent him to a religious institution to learn, which was a big deal at the time, because, if your parents were peasants, then you were a peasant yourself. You had no way of getting out of that life. The second example is a mother who was watching her young children in the courtyard of her farm and was attacked by the beast, who tried to just steal one of her children and carry it away. She fought valiantly and managed to recover the child, who then died of his injuries. But still, she was hailed as a mythical figure, heroic figure. The last heroic victim that I would mention is Marie-Jeanne Vallet, also known La Pucelle du Gévaudan, which can remind us of La Pucelle d'Orléans, was the French nickname for Joan of Arc. So Pucelle means virgin in French. Of course, that has religious connotations. She was out in the woods during one of the big hunts organized, and she came across the beast on a bridge. And speared it in the chest. The beast howled and jumped off the bridge into the water, and it was said that maybe it died, but it wasn't really clear. So after that, Marie-Jeanne Vallet became quite a renowned figure in the area, and this is one example of a statue that was made in her honor. François Antoine finally managed to kill a big wolf, about 55 kilos, which is pretty massive even for a wolf, had it taxidermied and sent to court and claimed to have killed the beast and succeeded against it. In court, it was met with, I would say, mild interest, apparently, because, it was just the body of an ordinary wolf and they were expecting something more, demonic. It's unclear today if this is the animal that was responsible for the attacks. Pretty sure that it's not, but Marie-Jeanne Vallet identified it as the beast that she had speared before. The attacks resume. So, of course, this did not put an end to the attacks, but as far as the king and the court was concerned, it did. So all of the attacks afterwards tend to be a bit less of an interest to Paris. Until Jean Chastel arrives and kills a beast. The beast was then sent to a doctor called Marin, who autopsied the corpse, necropsied, which is the equivalent for an animal, and noted quite a few unusual features. And Jean Chastel was hailed as having killed the beast. And after that, the number of attacks drastically reduced. So the remaining can be attributed to just regular wolves. It's unclear. But after that, the attack mostly stopped. So in the report by Marin, there are a few notes that are made that also can be, compared to the report. So Marin saw mostly a big wolf, but other reports from people like Jeanne Vallée say that the beast had tan, striped fur, an unusual nose, and a quite long snout. It was said to be impervious to bullets and ordinary weapons, and also to have unusual speed, in that it could appear in distant places almost simultaneously, or in time frames that did not really make sense for a wolf, and also seemed to be quite daring and unafraid of humans, attacking in broad daylight, including groups of people with weapons, people outside their own homes, and in the middle of hunting parties. So a few of the suppositions that have been made before. So on the right you have a wolf. Eurasian wolf is the species, mostly gray and white, not quite a lot of tan. On the top left is a Tasmanian tiger, which is now extinct, and matches the description pretty well. It's tan with stripes, looks like a wolf, but is not a wolf. At the bottom, you have an African wild dog on the left and a spotted hyena on the right. So some people hypothesize, and I would say this is probably my favorite hypothesis as well, that the beast could have been an escaped wild animal, in that there were several menageries and moving circuses in the area that displayed exotic animals. So it could be one of them attacking people, and that would explain why it was quite unusual for the local inhabitants. So other hypotheses, the first one would be that it's a werewolf, and I'll come back to that in a second. Other people said it could be an animal, either a big dog or a wolf, tamed and sent to kill by a person. It could be a lunatic or serial murderer, and I'll note that lunatic comes from lune, which means the moon in French. So a lunatic is literally someone rendered mad by the moon. There are also conspiracy theories saying that it was an organized crime syndicate or religious or pagan sacrifices. Most, I would say, contemporary experts would say that it was either merely a wolf or dog-wolf hybrid, or a group of animals. There are several books published in the last few decades, mostly by Abel Chevalet, Henri Pourrat, and Michel Louis. I'll mention a few of them later on, that confirm or that contribute to the legend that it was not an ordinary wolf. So just a note on loup-garou, werewolf. So this is the slide that was prompted by Sam's question this morning. So thank you, Sam, for asking. So loup-garou, you don't pronounce the P, is the French word for werewolf and has the same etymology, as in were means person, but garou already means wolfman itself. So loup-garou is a kind of like tautology, which means wolfman wolf, or like 2/3 wolf maybe. There's also another word that is common at the time, but has, that is not really used anymore in common French, which is versipel, a word of Latin origin, mostly used by the religious authorities, and it means someone who turns their skin inside out. And that's one of the specificities of French werewolves, is the idea that it's not a physical transformation, but just like the hair and the wolf body is inside the skin of the person. So that led to a few horrible things to test. If someone was a werewolf, you would cut them and see if there's hairs underneath. So depending on how the people were feeling, either you stop at one incision or you could like flay people, which is really horrible. The French werewolves are also presented as cynocephalic, which means that the head changes into a wolf, but the human body remains similar to a human, and it remains bipedal. And I would say, so I tracked down the first few sources that linked specifically the Beast of Gevaudan to the werewolf myth is mostly through Jean Chastel's killing of the beast in the end. So here are a few illustrations so the oldest one is the one in the middle, which is from the 16th century. The other ones are either from 17th or 18th century. So they, roughly fit that time period. They all depict a wolf that still retains some human qualities. So the one in the middle is, obviously has human body shape. The one on the right is bipedal. The one on the top left is the king Lycan, who was transformed into a wolf by Zeus, but this is a 17th century engraving that represents that story. And the one on the bottom left represents the transformation of a human into a werewolf. And there was also this idea that you could identify a person who was a werewolf while they were in their human form by excessive amount of body hair, especially having a unibrow. So the link between the beast and werewolves can be traced back to one of the earliest novels on the topic, which was the one from Élie Berthet called La Bête du Gévaudan. And in it is the origin of the story about the silver bullet. So the wolf or the beast is said to have been killed by a silver bullet. In 1946, the novel by Henri Pourrat further popularized that notion by saying that Chastel killed the beast with a bullet made from silver that was melted from medallions to the Virgin Mary. And there are also a few accounts saying that Jean Chastel recited prayers before killing the beast, and that's his piety that actually made it possible to slay it, because before it was impervious to bullets and weapons. So what is at stake here? Mostly it's the place of humans in the natural world, especially as it relates to ecosystems, more recently environmental concerns, also the relationship between human and non-human beings, either through pastoral exploitation or predation. There's also the material, economic, and sociopolitical realities of the time, and finally, symbolic, mythical, and religious concerns. So all wrapped up in one very nice gift. And I just added this little slide very late, but I couldn't resist. This is the Wolver, who is a Scottish werewolf myth. The Wolver is said to be a man-wolf that is mostly fishing a lot of the time. And if you don't have enough fish, or if you're poor, maybe he leaves some fish for you on your windowsill. I would also note that most reports say that wolves were eradicated on the British Isle, mostly during the Anglo-Saxon period. So there's very little folklore about the wolf, specifically in the more inhabited parts of England, but it's quite common both in Scotland and in Ireland. So for this slide, I thank my sister Susie, who is here tonight, who sent me these pictures. So the pictures on the left are just pictures that she took of newspapers, local newspapers, saying that the wolves are still doing some damage to flocks of sheep. And especially one of them said that it's either the sheep or the sheep herders. You have to choose. So there's a real contemporary conflict between the people whose livelihood is sheep and the mostly environmental activists that campaigned for the reintroduction of the wolves in this part of France. I would also note that this area is quite close to the Alps, which is a big group of mountains that are also common with Italy. So any kind of conservation or legislation has to be done with Italian authorities in mind, which of course, the wolves don't really care about national boundaries, so that does not really work for them. I would also add that now the Beast of Gevaudan has become kind of like a local celebrity. So this is the illustration that is on the website for the museum that is in Gévaudan. So Musée Fantastique de la Bête du Gévaudan. Here the word fantastique also, highlights the fact that they are not really concerned with historical accuracy. I particularly like the Photoshop of the glowing red eyes on the wolves. I would also add another example, quite contrasting example, which is the Parc de Courzieux, which is not too far from Gévaudan, but is a conservation park that you can visit. You can see wolves. You can see either wolves and raptors mostly. And that is one of the parks that Susie and I went to when we were younger and really enjoyed. So on the one side, you have the fantastic, mythical, folkloric aspect of the wolves. And then in the same area, you have more, down-to-earth conservation initiatives. So some quick notes and conclusion before I move on. The attacks from the beast come in a context of common wolf attacks. So what raises the question is, why this particular case garnered so much political and mediatic interest? It highlights the intersection between people's material lives, local administrative and religious institutions, and national political concerns. Even contemporary records mythify both the beast and its victims within religious and symbolic narratives that negotiate humanity's place within the natural world. And that's when I will mention the importance of the media. So the stories of since the first summer of the attacks, the newspaper Le Courrier d'Avignon, which is a regional newspaper, started reporting on the attacks. Before that time, it was really almost unheard of that such, basic facts would be reported, and anything that concerned peasants or rural poor people was not of interest to the newspapers. But at that point, the France was just out of the 7-Year War and really wanted something to distract the public attention from that failure. And also they thought that it could also boost the public opinion of the king and the monarchy if they could solve the problem of the beast, which is why there was also heightened pressure on any of the officials, including Captain Duhamel and François Antoine, to actually kill the beast. This kind of backfired on France again, because the reports made their way into the foreign press, especially in the UK, in Germany and Belgium, in which their own newspapers started reporting on the killings and mocking France and French people for failing to put a stop to what they saw as just basic wolf attacks. So of course, all of the engravings that I have shown that are contemporary to the story of the beast were made in that context of media frenzy almost. And this is one of the first international news stories of the time. And I'm now going to turn to Teen Wolf, which is a TV show that ran from 2011 to 2017 that has 6 seasons overall, if I'm correct. And that has quite interesting representations of both Werewolf and the story of the Beast of Gevaudan itself. So the story is based on a film of the same name, in which a teenager finds out that he is actually a werewolf. In the film, it's just because he's the descendant of werewolves. In that story, Scott is bitten by a werewolf and becomes one. So Scott McCall, that you see on the top left here, is a normal teenager that becomes a werewolf following a bite by another wolf. And then he has to deal with all of the troubles of, teenage issues, puberty, becoming a young adult, while also battling the transformations to his body that the werewolf bite has brought on. I would also note that the same as what I was mentioning earlier, the transformation is not purely just turning into a wolf, but it's quite partial most of the time. I think mostly for budget reasons, to be honest. But as you can see on the bottom, there was mostly prosthetics and a bit more facial hair and fangs added. I would also add that werewolves are not merely antagonists. Most of them are protagonists. They are the heroes of the story. They are not presented as inherently evil or bloodthirsty, but on the contrary, just normal people, if very powerful. So there's definitely a kind of power fantasy at play here. Excuse me. The mythology of the show overall is borrowed from various culture, and usually they explore the folklore of a specific culture for about half a season, so 12 episodes. So for example, the season 2 talks about Irish Druidism, then Japanese folklore and the Kitsune later on, and then the Aztec mythology in season 4. It usually reproduces or appropriates some of the elements, the magical elements from these stories, and uses them for plot points. I would say also that it reproduces the common pop culture myth of a wolf hierarchy. So in the 1940s and mostly 1950s, Swiss zoologist Rudolf Schenkel published Expression Studies on Wolves, a series of observations on wolf packs, and that's the origin of the term alpha wolf and also beta wolf, omega wolf and such. So he saw that there was a stark competition, especially from the most powerful males, for control of territories and resources, and that led to all of the discussions about alpha males in general as a symbol of heightened masculinity. Of course, he realized that his observations were inaccurate or lacked nuance, and tried to take them back, but it was too late, and still published to this day because his book is one of the best sellers from the publisher. So what was important to note is that his observations were valid for wolves in captivity, in which they have very limited territory and increased competition. Most wolf packs in the wild are composed of a breeding pair, so a male and a female, and their cubs. And when the cubs come of age, they leave and found their own packs and their own territories outside of the parental unit. So that's why when you look at wolves in captivity, you have the grown-up cubs that become to challenge the territory of the parents, basically. So yeah, the TV show, we can discuss it a bit later on. I'm sure that I thought there was older people in the in the talk today who are more experts on Teen Wolf than me. But the show definitely makes use of the alpha, beta, omega hierarchy, even if sometimes it gets a bit muddled in its own mythology. For example, in season 2, there is an alpha pack, so pack only composed of alphas. I'm not really sure how that's supposed to work, but that works. I would also mention the Argent family. So bottom right, you have Alison Argent, who is from a long-lasting family of werewolf hunters of French origin. So anyone who speaks French knows that Argent, argent, means silver. So of course, they are a family of werewolf hunters. On the top right is a family heirloom, a pendant representing the Beast of Gevaudan itself. This is a fan illustration that illustrates an example of the bestiaries. So in the middle here, you have the 3 images taken screenshots directly from the show of the Argent bestiary that shows the different types of werewolves and creatures that encountered. So top is Wendigos and bottom middle is werewolf. Their motto in French is "Nous chassons ceux qui nous chassent," which means we hunt those who hunt us, and is later changed to "Nous protégeons ceux qui ne peuvent pas se protéger eux-mêmes." We protect those who can't protect themselves, even if in the show they make a mistake with the pronouns, but I'm not going to be too nitpicky on that topic. So yeah, we will come back to that in the Q&A session. I think there's a further discussions to be had, loads of things to say about Teen Wolf. I would say watching it as an adult, it holds up a lot better than one might expect. It has real depth of character development, and also gender and race relationships are a lot more interesting than what the alpha male topic could suggest. So there are female werewolves. There are also other types of, as you can see here, other types of creatures that represent various forms of therianthropy. So that refers to the fact of a human transforming into an animal. So you have, for example, weird coyotes, we have weird jaguars. And that also reminded me of the Scottish myth of the Selkie, who is a person and / a seal, and can transform into a seal through its skin. So, you know, the fact that you change your skin to become an animal is also quite a common theme in a lot of these myths. You can also see in Indian folklore, there's the tiger, well, weird tiger, kinda. So yeah, this is a common myth in many cultures. And yeah, before we move on to discussing Le Pacte des Loups, I think we are at the halfway point. So we'll stop sharing my screen and we can have like questions or comments. Okay. So I am now moving on to the topic of Le Pacte des Loups, which is a film directed and co-written by Christopher Gans, who is one of the, well, at the time was one of the most famous French directors. I'll just sum up the plot quite quickly. There are some spoilers, but also there are quite a few, you know, surprises and twists that I won't cover. So I still think it is worth watching for those of you who haven't yet. Just a warning that the film is quite outdated, or rather just plain racist and sexist at times. So don't expect something that is, you know, unproblematic. So the story is bookended by the narrative voice of the Marquis of Apcher, Marquis d'Apcher, that I've mentioned before, who is a real historical figure. He was a nobleman in the area of the attacks. So the story starts, he is writing his memoirs as the French revolutionaries are about to beat down his door. And he recounts how the attacks of a mysterious beast plagued the Gévaudan county, and how a character called Grégoire de Fonsac was sent like to solve the problem. So here's a little gallery of characters. So then the film flashbacks. After several attacks from an unknown animal ravages the Gévaudan area of France, royal knight and naturalist Grégoire de Fonsac is sent by King Louis XV to investigate. He's accompanied by Mani, who is an Iroquois, whose life he saved while he was stationed in New France. So that's one of the territories that France lost in what is currently Canada. So basically, the French massacred all of Mani's family, but Grégoire saved Mani, and then as a form of gratitude, Mani attached himself to Grégoire as a companion. Throughout the film, Mani does not really communicate much, apart from to Grégoire. He doesn't speak to anyone else. Grégoire is introduced to the noble and notable families of the area, among which the beautiful Marianne de Morangias, so top left, and her brother Jean-François, played by Vincent Cassel, one of the most famous French actors. So Jean-François is an avid explorer and hunter who lost an arm in Africa. So it's suggested that it is Senegal, who was a French colony at the time. So he was fighting an unknown beast that just mauled his arm. Grégoire's libertine mores, while somewhat acceptable in court, clash with the religious puritanism of the Gévaudan area. And he finds comfort with Sylvia, an Italian courtesan, and the madame of the local brothel. He also befriends the young and shy Marquis d'Apcher, who is also, one of the few historical figures in the film that also acts a bit as a foil, for the spectator, like the innocence of the spectator. The story follows a similar structure as the historical records. The beast attacks mostly young women tending sheep out in the fields. Local and national authorities organize hunts, hire trackers and specialists, but to no avail. The religious authorities, in the person of Father Sadis, claim that the beast is a sign of God's discontent with the slackening of popular piety, or sent by the church to prey on godless people. The film also accurately portrays the skepticism of the local population and peasants, the lack of trust in both the noblemen and the church. Several episodes of the film that are, the most, I would say, spectacular episodes are also directly borrowed from historical records. For example, the practice of men hunters dressing up as women to bait the beast. So there's a scene in particular in which you see very masculine, hairy men dressed in outrageous drag, and then they attack Mani because they're racist, and Mani is just a person of color there. Mani and Grégoire become increasingly convinced that the killings are not done by wolves, and Mani in particular is upset that the locals hunt and kill hundreds of wolves in retaliation. And there's a very pathetic scene in which you see all of a big pack of wolves fleeing, including cubs, and then all of them being just cut down by the people. Mani calls the wolves his brothers. So in the English title, The Brotherhood of the Wolf, that brotherhood can also refer to Mani's relationship with wolves. The film is sprinkled with a healthy dose of native mysticism. So Grégoire explains that in Mani's tribe, they believe that everyone has a spirit animal or a totem animal. And there's a scene in which he does it a bit as a party trick that, he goes around the noble families during a banquet dinner and tells them who is their spirit animal. After Grégoire and Mani's apparent failure, the king sends his own weapon master, Lord de Beauterne, who is modeled after François Antoine, and he kills a large wolf, taxidermies it, modifies it a bit to make it more impressive, and then returns triumphant to court, where it delights thrill-loving nobles, which is a departure from the historical records. Normally it shows that the nobles were not very impressed by it. The king is very happy with the conclusion of this story, decides that the beast has been killed, and Grégoire is supposed to be sent to Senegal to quieten him, basically. He refuses to succumb to the pressure, and urged by Marquis of Apcher, he decides to return to Gévaudan, this time determined to use Mani's tracking skills to find the beast. And that's when he starts using the same makeup as Mani, basically. The attacks continues. Grégoire and Mani then find a network of catacombs and holes inside the granite facade of the mountains that is used by a secret society to hide the beast, which it actually controls. So the beast is about the halfway point of the film. The beast is revealed to be an animal that is under the control of a human, an unknown figure with a big black coat and a mask. So that secret society is called Le Pacte. So it's quite different from the English version of the Brotherhood. It also includes women, not just men. They are led by the local priest, Sadis, and the pact aims to restore God's worship in the area threatened the king's authority because he supported the Enlightenment, philosophical and scientific movement, and the more libertine mores that happened in court at the time. So they think that if they kill people and show that the king is impotent, then that will bring people back to the church, basically. They also kill Mani after he finds out the catacombs, which enrages Grégoire and he swears vengeance. Then, further plot twist, Sylvia is revealed to be a spy sent by the Pope to actually end the pact's activities that are judged to be too extreme. Other plot development, Jean-François is revealed to be the actual Beastmaster. The Beast is a lion that he brought back from his hunting trips as a cub, so from Africa, and trained to wear spiked armor and attack. He also reveals that his arm was not actually mauled or amputated, but just bandaged behind his back, a bit like what the beggars from the Cour des Miracles, the miracle court in Paris, did. Still not sure to this day why he would pretend to be disabled or what the kind of why, but yeah, definitely supposed to be like a monstrous revelation. He also reveals to be in love with his own sister, Marianne de Morangias, and when she does not return his advances, he rapes her. So yeah, just a very nice character all around. In the end, Grégoire manages to kill Jean-François. He also kills quite a few of the pact with Sylvia's help. The beast is fatally wounded, and in a final act of pity, Grégoire puts it out of its misery. I would note that the film is particularly ambitious, both thematically, aesthetically, and narratologically, but it also imbued with sexism and racism. So, be forewarned if you decide to watch it. I would also say that the beast is presented more as a human and political monster rather than a mere animal. It follows the conspiracy theory of several French pop historians that I've mentioned before. There is notably no supernatural element or fantasy element in that film. It is purely historical, fiction. Well, not necessarily realistic, but there's no supernatural elements. It centers the culture clash between historical periods, the 7-Year War, and sandwiched between the 7-Year War and the French Revolution, France and its colonies. And I would mention that both Mani and the Beast can be considered as metaphors for the colonial subjects in general. So both of them were the victim of French colonial military enterprises. In both cases, their families were killed, and then they were brought back to metropolitan France by people who ultimately used them. Paris and the court is also contrasted with rural France, which it struggles to control and rule. There's a contrast between the nobility that have, expansive banquets and, extravagant feasts, while the peasantry is at the mercy of the wolf's attack. It also highlights the clash between humans and the natural world, and between religious institutions, beliefs, and superstitions. So these are just a few slides that show what the beast looked like. So at the bottom right and left, you can see just screenshots from the film itself. And on the top right, you can see one of the character design illustrations that were made. Christopher Gans was particularly proud of that film. He based it on a previous direct-to-TV film called La Bête du Gévaudan, and then made a special edition of the DVD with many extra, behind the scenes and inspiration notes and such. So if you're interested in that film, I would definitely recommend getting the special edition of the DVD. Stylistically and generically, this is one of the highest budget French films. To this day, one of the most successful French films internationally, still quite famous for it. It definitely falls into some typically French storytelling and visual traditions, especially film de cap et d'épée, like the Three Musketeers. I would thank Alistair Watson, one of my friends, for telling me that the English version of that genre is swashbuckling adventures. So there's definitely a very strong tradition of French historical fiction in that regard, but there's also quite a lot of international flair in it. The creature design and effects were by Jim Henson's Creature Shop, which is very famous for practical effects, but also digital puppetry. So that makes, I would say the special effects have aged very well. And are still very believable and impactful to this day. And this is definitely an American studio that is, famous for doing Labyrinth, for example. So yeah, definitely quite interesting in that regard. The fight choreography, martial arts inspiration and cinematography, through the influence and the casting of Marc Dacascos, so the actor that plays Manny, there's definitely some kung fu and taekwondo inspiration in the fight scenes. There are extended choreographed fight scenes, and this is also the first film after The Matrix that used the bullet time effect, which is basically when time slows down, there's slow motion while the camera pans around the action itself. So yeah, definitely an interesting film that conflate or deals with a lot of different issues, both from historical and sociological perspective. And now, for the most fun part of this talk, I am going to talk about puppet history. So this is a series of videos by the content creator Watcher on YouTube. Most of the people involved with that channel are all these from BuzzFeed, which is a content creator as well on YouTube. Watcher was created by Stephen Lim, Shane Madej, and Ryan Vergara. It is a series of educational videos exploring sensational historical events with a penchant for gruesome, creepy events. This game show, so this takes the form of a game show hosted by The Professor, which is a blue puppet, as you can see on the right, that is animated and voiced by Shane, with 2 contestants usually per video, and that's usually Ryan and a special guest. The aesthetic of the puppet show is borrowed for this series of videos. For a French person, of course, it evokes Guignol. So this is an image of Guignol, which is a very famous French puppet from the Lyon area, so very near to Gévaudan as well. For British speaking or for English speaking people, I would say maybe Punch and Judy is a more relevant reference, but given that we're talking about Gévaudan today, I thought that I would show you a bit of Guignol first. So the 3 characters for this video are the Professor first, Ryan as one of the usual suspects for this video, and guest Sarah Rubin, who's also an old content creator for YouTube. Or BuzzFeed, I mean. There are quite a few cinematic references here. So the introduction of the topic is using that kind of black and white horror film aesthetics, especially from the Hammer or Universal Studios, with the tagline, "There's a monster in them dark woods." Other references throughout the video, so for example, Ryan says, "Is that a real beast?" or like M. Night Shyamalan's The Village scenario. They also reference Beauty and the Beast, which is originally a French fairy tale written by Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve in 1740, and also emblematic of visual culture through practical effects and animation. So you have puppetry and makeup prosthetics for the Jean Cocteau film animation, black and white film, brilliant, and then the animated version by Disney. They also mention the Beast from X-Men, which also happens to be blue, so they ask if it's related to the Professor, but also the possibility of it being a human killer, like Sweeney Todd, the character popularized by the Penny Dreadful kind of newspapers, and also the possibility of it being rural France's Zodiac killer. I also mentioned briefly, go back to the characters, they mention cryptozoology and monsters quite a lot. So Sarah is a self-professed monster aficionado, quote, and Ryan, quote, one of the world's leading cryptozoologists who thinks most cryptids are nice. So the first, they come into the story thinking that the wolf is going to be, quite nice. Turns out not to be. So cryptozoology is a pseudoscience founded in the 1950s by European zoologist Bernard Heuvelmans and American scientist Evan T. Anderson. It's in between taxonomy and natural sciences on the one side and folklore study on the other side, but because it does not really follow the methodology of either, it just happens to be in between, it's actually rejected by both. This is very in keeping with the brand of entertainment of the Watcher channel that also has a series on ghost hunting, another one on urban legends and scary stories like creepypasta type. So this whole channel has to be taken more like a cabinet of curiosities, more concerned with novelty and sensationalism than historical or scientific truth purely. That does not mean that anything, is particularly wrong or incorrect. As far as I can tell, anything mentioned in this video is actually true, but the video does not cite any historical source or artistic source bar one, which happens to be one of the most recent ones, so it's not in public domain. So while I would say that the work of research being done for this video is very impressive, it still does not follow, the kind of academic rigor that you would expect from a, a normal journal paper. Of course, it does not have to, like, that's not what I mean. I would also say, before moving on, that throughout this episode, there's several references made to the current situation. So the episode was made and recorded during the COVID-19 pandemic. The three people are actually in different places. They're each at home, so it's recorded via a platform like Zoom, for example. And throughout the video, there are parallels made between the lives of the French peasants at the time and our current pandemic situation. So for example, they say, the professor says, no one was poorer, more isolated or busier working for their lives than the French peasants in the 18th century. And Sarah says, well, that seems very relatable. Ryan then says that contrary to the claims, the aims of escapism of the show, the whole episode is going to be a bit too close to home. And then later on, they mentioned that peasants were too poor and out of PTO to spend time searching the woods for the beast and had to go in the fields to work for their livelihood. In a further quote, they say, I would like to stay home, but I also enjoy eating. Maybe the government could pay for us to stay home while we solve this health crisis. So framing the beast attack as a health crisis is also a very modern and anachronistic way to approach the problem, but that also makes history more relevant for current audiences and creates quite, funny atmosphere. So I'm not begrudging them that. Aesthetically, the show borrows the kind of interactivity of puppet theater with questions and answers between the puppets and the spectator and the audience, and also this kind of like framing with the red curtains. It uses old painting, traditional paintings and maps in order to give it like a bit of an old-timey feel, and the figures are cut out and animated independently, most of them digitally, but quite a few of them physically with practical effects. I would also add that one single painter was represented a lot more in the paintings chosen, and that's William Adolphe Bouguereau, who was a painter from the end of the 19th century, so almost, well, quite a few centuries, 1 century after the beast attacks. And I thought that the history of Bouguereau was quite interesting and motivated the choice of his paintings for this. So all of the female characters that you can see here are from his paintings. So he was originally quite famous at the end of the 19th century as an academic painter. So he painted mostly religious and mythological scenes, but then with the rise of Impressionism, he really quite quickly and rapidly fell out of favor with the French public. He was particularly attacked by Monet for his smooth airbrushed style, as opposed to the style of the Impressionists that put a lot of value in seeing the individual brushstrokes. So he found a new, flow of inspiration and cash via his wife, who is American artist Elizabeth Jane Gardner, who was also an academic painter in the same style. So he started selling paintings in the Americas, in the United States, mostly with this pastoral theme. So he painted a lot of shepherd women, shepherd young girls, pastoral, landscapes with a lot of farm animals. And this had a lot of success in the United States, mostly through the Francophile nostalgia, through this pastoral scene. So the fact that this is an American channel choosing art from a French painter that made bank via the use of pastoral nostalgia and Francophilia, I thought was quite telling. And of course, it creates quite a striking visual impact as well. So quite quick conclusions before I finish. I think I'm a tiny bit ahead of time. The story of the Beast of Gevaudan illustrates the convergence between the material realities and the symbolic representations. That story can evolve over time to accommodate a lot of different and changing perspectives about the natural world and about the wolf in particular. It can be adapted to several media and genres, which explains its enduring power and popularity. It also interrogates the relationship between humans and the natural world, our attitudes towards public health and the social good, and our own individual mortality and responsibility. It reminds us that we are made of flesh, that our flesh is vulnerable, but also that we can be, linked to animals and close to animals and have a similar potential for cruelty, which is quite telling that a lot of the villains in the story that I've mentioned are villainous because of their morality and their cruelty and not because of their animal instincts and violence. And I will stop here. I thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.